Okay, so now that you've put your quilt top together, you've squared it up, you're ready to layer your quilt sandwich. So your quilt sandwich consists of 3 layers: your backing, your batting, and then your quilt top. And what I like to do is secure my quilt backing to my surface that I'm going to be working with. And I went ahead and pre-cut some tape here. And what you're going to do is you're going to tape the edges of your quilt backing, and this will help keep it pretty taut while you assemble your sandwich. Think of the tape as your condiments, if you will. Okay, we'll slide this out of the way so you can really see it. So you do one side, you kind of give it a little tug, you do the other side. Another little piece down here at the end. Okay. And then you repeat for your top and your bottom. Okay. Give this a good little tug. Sometimes if you just put the tape on the fabric, you can pull it down. And you'll kind of see it start to take some shape and keep it pretty tight. And this will help from shifting when you're actually quilting your quilt sandwich and your quilt together. And you can use masking tape, you can use painter's tape, whichever you prefer. I love to use masking tape. You can buy it at the hardware store, it's pretty inexpensive. All right. Let's see, we'll get this, readjust this side here a little bit. Okay, that looks pretty good. Okay, now you're gonna put your batting down. And what I like to do is fold my sandwich in half. That way nothing is exposed. Get rid of any loose threads, because sometimes loose threads will show up through the white of your fabrics. Then you take your spray baste and you hold it about, I don't know, 8 to 10 inches away from your surface. And you want to make sure if you're doing this on your dining room table that you kind of protect your surface, like lay down an old towel or an old sheet or something so that you don't get the spray baste everywhere. It comes up pretty easy, you just have to put a little elbow grease into it. And so I'm going to spray my backing. Just give it a generous little spray there. And then you take and you just smooth this out. Okay. And then repeat for the other side, getting rid of any loose threads. You also want to watch out for overspray. That can happen with spray base, and it can be a number of things from the temperature in your home to just not spraying too close, and it won't come out, so just be very careful. It's happened to me a couple of times. Okay, and then you just put your batting down, and then you're going to repeat for your top. Here's want to make sure you get rid of any loose threads, especially a darker color thread, because it will show through. You can use your snips and kind of cut through that. We're giving this a good, healthy little spray. Okay, and then we're going to smooth this guy out. And again, you don't want to stretch it. It's the same with sewing and pressing. You don't want to stretch the fabric because the spray base is pretty much like a glue. And I like to go in all of the little nooks and crannies of my blocks. Okay, and repeat for the other side. Make sure there's no orphan threads hanging out anywhere. Give it a healthy little spray. stuff is very stinky too. Make sure you open a window or have a vent on or something. Okay. And again, just starting from the middle, working your way out. Give it a little press with your hands, making sure you don't stretch it. Getting in all the seams. And in your pattern, I've included the size of the batting and the backing that you need, so you won't have to estimate that. Usually I like about 1 inch to 2 inches excess. That way when I go to actually trim up the quilt, I'm not trimming up right against the quilt. I have a little bit of room. Okay, now that you've done that, put the lid on that. Now you're going to remove your tape from your backing. And we're going to work on the quilting next. And when I'm removing my tape, this is usually when I think about what kind of quilt design I want to do. And if you follow me on social media, the Tattooed Quilter on Instagram or Facebook, you can see that I tend to usually do straight line quilting. I don't really do any, you know, sort of designs, only because I'm a little scared of free motion quilting on my machine. One of these days I'll learn. Okay, so now that you removed your tape, you have your quilt sandwich all ready to go, you're going to machine quilt it, and I'm going to walk you through how to machine quilt it. So I've switched out my machine's presser foot to the dual feed walking foot. And again, you can use your regular walking foot if you want. It's totally up to you. I've switched out my needle to a regular sewing needle, just a generic sewing needle. It doesn't have to be a 90-14, it can be a 70-10 or an 80-12. It's totally your preference. And then I've adjusted the stitch length to a 4.0. Again, totally your preference. I would probably go anywhere from a 3.5 to a 4.5. Anything above a 4.5 is like a basting stitch, it'll be too big. And because this quilt is pretty, you know, simple in shape, I'm not going to do any sort of, you know, side quilting, you know, from one angle, you know, from one end to the other end. I'm going to keep it pretty straight. And because I trimmed this quilt up earlier, I'm actually going to use the edge of my quilt here for my guide for sewing. For quilting. For other times you could do masking tape or a fabric marker to draw your lines. So let's get started quilting. And I'm going to use the edge of my walking foot to keep everything nice and straight. And I've also, the speed on my machine, I've turned it down only because I feel like with the walking foot, if you go super fast, it will become really wonky and then you won't be able to have a straight line. So start a little bit off of your batting. And then you're just following the edge of your quilt to keep it pretty straight. You might have to adjust every now and again. Again, going pretty slow. Sometimes I like to check myself to make sure I'm pretty good. Yep, looks pretty good. Keeping it pretty flat. Okay. And then again, going off of your quilt top onto the batting a little bit. And there's your first line of quilting. It's a little crooked down there at the bottom, but that's okay. It's handmade, right? All right, so you're just going to keep going, and then this time around, instead of following the edge of your quilt top, you're going to follow the stitch line that you first put in. Let's go ahead and put this back in the machine and follow that line. It's also probably a good idea when you start to quilt that you wind up a couple of bobbins so you're ready to go. So that way when one bobbin runs out, you can actually switch it out and put another one in. Okay, we're gonna keep quilting here. Let's add our next line. Okay, so now we're gonna finish up our last row of quilting. And again, we were just following our stitch lines. There we go. Okay, so we'll take it out of our machine. We'll bring it over here. Looks really good. Couple little organic wonky lines in here, but I think that's okay. Gives it a little character. Now we're going to trim this quilt sandwich down to our quilt top. Okay, and all you do is you're going to follow the edge of your quilt top. Now, if you densely quilted, you're going to have some shrinkage, so it might be a little off, so you might have to square it up a little bit more. But we did pretty good. Oops, missed a little bit there. Okay, and then you just keep rotating until you get all the edges. Last one there. Okay, so there is your quilt top. Now you're all set to add your binding. I'm going to show you how to add your binding next.